Hey all, thank you again for watching Gordon Causey, and it's now the 7th of November 2023. It's 1:23 a.m. or thereabouts, and I just wanted to do a very quick follow-up on the video I did yesterday talking about this notion of supersessionist replacement theology, and I started to address it in my video yesterday, but then I go into one, I start going down a path and I never get back. And the path I was starting to go down, but then I got too sidetracked by history, is why supersession why this replacement theology that took firm root in the 400s, in the 5th century, why it's so difficult, why for many people it's so hard to let go of it. Because most people, this is my view, people are attached to their church, often generationally. The church I was attending, a Reformed church, a Dutch Reformed church, is generational. So you have kids going there whose parents, grandparents, great-parents, great-great-grandparents went to this church. So whatever doctrine they espouse, you don't want to lose your connection to that community. So I understand that aspect of it. And also, a lot of people simply will default to the leadership, the pastor, because, reading the Bible yourself, well, I'm not qualified, I didn't go to seminary, he went to seminary, he's been schooled in the doctrines and the catechisms and the professions of this denomination, so they know best. And, I'm just happy coming here, and I like coffee hour. And I like the men's group or the women's group, or my kids go to this group and that group and everything. I mean, my father many years ago said that church in a lot of cases that it's just a social club, and that's true. That's true, and that's true in all denominations. Individual believers. Some are very, pray all the time. Some pray very occasionally. Some pray never. It's a social thing. But so this notion of supersessionism, this replacement theology, takes firm hold in the 5th century, in the 400s. Augustine of Hippo. Well, I would argue it was introduced earlier in the 2nd century. Not the foundational. The church wasn't founded on this doctrine. Because this is the foundational book of the church, the Bible. But in the 2nd century, after the church has been established, some guys came in, like I've said their names before: Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Ignatius of Antioch, Tertullian. These guys came in and they introduced this, and then basically Augustine of Hippo pretty much codified it in the 400s, 5th century. Only thing is, it kind of made sense in a sense. If you think about it in the context of the year 400, 500, 600, the early Roman church. Rome thinks of itself as the center of the universe. Certainly they don't want Jerusalem to be Zion, to be the center of the universe. Rome is the center of the universe. So Zion takes on a metaphorical meaning. It's not, that place anymore. It's us, or it's, our church now. And besides, look, even if you want to take it, look, there is no Israel. The people have been scattered to the 4 corners of the earth. And so, it doesn't exist anymore, but but we want to maintain our authority. We want to maintain our power. Churches in a lot of ways are political. They're a way to exercise power, control, authority over people. And so, you have to believe our interpretation of this. So our interpretation, don't you read it. I mean, Rome was famous for the fact that, the Bible was in Latin. Latin ceased to be the lingua franca. It ceased to be the language spoken by people, but they still insisted on the Latin Mass, so people couldn't even understand what was being said. And the church, Rome, maintained that they had authority, that there was something called papal infallibility. So whatever the Pope said when it came to matters of church law, church doctrine, even if it flew completely in the face of the Bible. Well, it doesn't matter. We have the authority. Then the 1500s come along, and we have something called the Reformation. I forget the exact year, 15 something. Martin Luther, and I forget the exact town. It was in Germany. He went up and he nailed his 90 some odd thesis arguments, and basically calling upon the church, because basically at that time there is the church. Nowadays you walk around and, well, am I going to go to a Roman Catholic? Will I go to Episcopalian Anglican communion? Will I go to Baptist, Pentecostal, Reformed, United? Which one? Methodist, Presbyterian? It's endless. And then it was just the church. So he nailed up his thesis to the church, and he lovingly, one of the proposals, we got to get back to the Bible. And through Martin Luther and through other later individuals like John Calvin, Jean Calvin, they came up with this notion of the 5 solas, one of which is sola scriptura, meaning Bible alone. It's got to be based on this. Now, it's 1500. What's happening with the God's incredibly important, for whatever reason, piece of real estate there on the Levantine coast? What's happening with it? Well, at this point in history, it's ruled by the Ottoman Empire. They got control of it sometime in the 1400s. And the Ottoman Empire wasn't going to give it up. It was a strong empire, and the Crusades were hundreds of years in the past. And there was no real groundswell of desire to retake the Holy Land. And besides which, it doesn't matter. We've replaced Israel now. We are now the church, and they stuck with that doctrine. And in a fashion, you have all these prophecies, Isaiah 11, verses 11 and 12, talking about God gathering the children of Israel back a second time into the promised land. And, well, what about that prophecy? It doesn't matter. Forget about it. And from the pulpits, as even though Rome was, it was a political body, and so were the Reformed churches, the Protestant churches that sprang from it. They were political bodies. The reason, there was the 30 Years' War in Europe between Protestants and Catholics, trying to, Mary Queen of Scots and the Spanish Armada. This was all the 30 Years' War, and the crux of it was over whether Rome held sway or whether it was a Protestant denomination. But everything, even the Protestant denominations that sprang from the Reformation, they still held to this replacement theology, because there's no Israel. There is no Israel to go back to. So God can't gather his people back, but we still want power and control. So we're not going to teach that it's going to happen as the Bible says it will. We're going to say we replace them, because goodness knows it may never happen again. But God's promises never come back void. And so 1948 comes along, and now the church has an issue. Now the church has a problem. No one ever talked about the Schofield Bible until 1948. And the issue with because they didn't have anything to take issue with. Maybe they started to notice it in the years preceding, because the Zionist movement became political in nature, and they really started to push for a reestablishment of a Jewish nation state, a Jewish homeland. In the late 1800s, Jews, sadly, had been facing persecution for centuries in Europe. And I heard Jordan Peterson frame it wonderfully, explaining, how Jews were very successful and they were a minority, which is, almost the perfect recipe for persecution. You want to be persecuted, be successful, be a minority, mix, and you get the Holocaust. And, the auto de fe, the Spanish Inquisition, the Holocaust was more or less the culmination of it. And So now all of a sudden, the Scofield Bible, which is just the Bible, to be clear, I have a Bible here. I've got all my Bibles out. I've got my 50-year-old Bible I got in grade 3. I've got my Bible that I got in university for my Greek and Biblical Traditions course. And I have something that approximates. This is called the Fire Bible, and it would be the equivalent of what the Scofield Bible is. It's just your standard English Standard Version. It's just the regular Bible with commentary below. So when I read in Second Kings about Manasseh and his idolatry and how it's being denounced, I can read commentary on the bottom. So I'll show it to you. So the top part here, this is just the Bible. And this bottom part down here, this is commentary on what you, so you read the Bible, and then if you want some help, you can read down here. And that's what the Scofield Bible is. And what the Scofield Bible did is it didn't teach that the church, the Big C church, had replaced Israel. It didn't teach that because Paul doesn't teach that. The Bible doesn't teach that. And so we get to 1948, and now, and I understand the argument that some put forth, and they say, and I don't have an issue with the fact that people say, well, the Rothschilds, and that there are some bad actors who were involved in reestablishing Israel as a nation state, and God wouldn't use the acts of evil people for good ends. And I would ask, have you read the Bible? You don't think God can take what men do for evil and use it for good? I'm sure I referenced it in my last video, but that's the whole, that's the almost pretty much, that's one of the highlights, the climax of the Joseph story, when Joseph's his brothers commit an act of evil. They want to murder their brother, but they throw him into a pit, and they're contemplating murdering him. But cooler heads prevail. I think it's either Reuben or Judah, one of his brothers, prevails upon them not to murder him. They see a caravan coming by, and they say, look, we'll just tell Daddy that Joseph was killed by a wild animal, torn to pieces, and that we'll cover his special coat in ram's blood or goat's blood as evidence, and we can sell him to that caravan. So Joseph is sold to the caravan. It drops him off in Egypt. He's sold into slavery there. He ends up in prison. All kinds of bad things happen. But then eventually Joseph rises to be the most powerful man in Egypt, and he saves Egypt from a horrible famine that lasts 7 years. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. And it's during that 7 years of famine that Jacob and the 70, his brothers and their wives and their children, there are 70 of them in all, they're at risk of starving to death, but they've heard that there's food to be had in Egypt, so they go to get it. They go to buy some food, and cutting to the chase, they have a couple, they meet once with Joseph, get some food, then they come back a second time, and it's on the second visit that Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers, and he says, it's me, your brother, who you sold into slavery. Is Dad alive? That's what he's interested in knowing. He wants to know if his dad is alive. But the brothers are stunned. They can't find their tongues. They're like, it's not in the text, but you can hear it. You can just hear what you can suppose what they're thinking. They're going, we're going to die. The guy, our brother who we sold into slavery, he's now the second most powerful man in the world's most powerful country. He's going to get even. We're going to die. And Joseph forgives them. And he says, you did it for evil, but God used it for good. If you don't know the story, it's at the end of the book of Genesis. I forget what chapter, starts somewhere in the 30s or 40s, somewhere around there. You can find it. Great story Great story. What men do for evil, God uses for good. So I can reconcile the potential that, yeah, there some evil players, were there some bad actors involved in Israel being reestablished as a nation state in officially May 14th, 1948. It had started years before that in the 1800s. The Ottoman, their empire had been in decline for a long time. By the 1800s, 1867, Mark Twain, famous author, Huckleberry Finn, and Tom Sawyer, he had traveled to the Holy Land. He was writing, I think the newspaper was the St. Louis Dispatch, and he was sending back reports on the Holy Land. And then later he took the stories he'd written, expounded on them, and he didn't just travel to the Holy Land, he traveled around the world. And he put it into a book called The Innocents Abroad. I think that's the name. And it's got the word innocent or innocence and abroad. I think it's The Innocents Abroad. And you read excerpts on that of Mark Twain's description of, places like Galilee and Jerusalem and Bethlehem, barren wasteland, nothing grows here, no people live here, worthless, a dry, arid soil that's not looked after, even olive trees and cactus that love barren, deserted land can hardly be found here. And what happened is, starting in the 1800s, so shortly after Mark Twain wrote that, Jews started coming back, and they started buying land from the Arabs who were living there, or the Arabs who owned it. If they were Arab, it's possible they were Turkish, it's possible they were Persian. Let's face it, it's the linchpin of, pardon me, it's the linchpin Israel is of that land. Is the linchpin of three continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. It's actually on the Asian continent. It's on that plate, I guess, continental plates. And it's on the Asian plate. But it's right where they all connect. And God has his eye on it, and so does the enemy. So does Satan. Satan wants it too. And that's where those who hold to this replacement theology will say, well, Satan's got it now because Israel's there. Well, I rely sola scriptura. I rely on the Bible and Isaiah 11 and 12. Isaiah chapter 11, verses 11 and 12, if you read them, talks about all the countries to which the Jews have been scattered. And at the end, it's the four corners of the earth. And it says that he will gather them back a second time. Replacement theologians starting in the 400s, 5th century. It doesn't matter anymore. Keep paying attention to us. Keep putting your money in the plate. Keep paying your pew tax. Don't worry about that. Why isn't Israel around anymore? Oh, God, we replaced them. We've taken over. I'm doing a bit of a straw man. I apologize. But within the context of the time, there was a logic to replacement theology, because where's Israel? And the Jewish people were scattered all over the place and weren't going to be reforming a country. That would take an act of God. 1948 is somewhat miraculous. It's never, I would invite anyone, I can't think of an instance where a country, where a people has reoccupied a land after 2,000 years. And don't hit me with this Ashkenazi Khazarian Jew. I understand that I heard someone today saying Yiddish is not a Semitic language, and it's got no connection to Hebrew. Yeah, except the Hebrew alphabet. It was the Hebrew language became heavily influenced by the precursors to today's German language, to Germanic languages. And so they borrowed some of the words and wrote them down in their own Hebrew alphabet. And yeah, there are a lot of some, and it's actually ironic. I was reading an article. It turns out some Arabic words have been influenced by Yiddish. Talk about coming full circle, because both Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic, and probably others too, are Semitic languages. The Arabs and the Jews are Semitic people. They're all descended from Abraham. Abraham had two children. He had one son, Ishmael, by Hagar, his wife's Egyptian slave. And then Sarah herself had Isaac. And then from Isaac, we get Jacob. And then Jacob becomes Israel. And then we have his 12 sons being the 12 tribes of Israel. Gad, the Gadites, Benjamin, the Benjamites, Judah, the Judahites, and on down the line. Levi, the Levites. Anyway, went on way too long. Should have kept it under 15, but God bless. Someone watched, so thank you. And I just wanted to get this out there. Have a great night. God bless.